It's really a pleasure to be here and back at the NSIF meetings. I can remember early on in my career coming to these meetings right after they started, and I think the only person here that's been around longer than me at attending these probably is Everett Faulkner, who was one of the founders of getting this off and started, if I remember right. So Everett, you know, you did well. Yeah. Yeah, and also my talk today probably could be given by several other people in this room that have had the same kind of experiences and have that ability or have the chance to do some of the things and look at the human capital aspects that we need from a university standpoint. How do we develop that? And it's been a topic of concern, I think, in the pork industry now is getting very concerned about it, but it's been a topic of concern going through a lot of other species for some time. And even our beef people have started to recognize that this is something that's going to be really important for them in the future as they start to try to find the appropriate human capital to fill their needs within their industries. Having served as department chair at two major universities for about roughly 30 years, you have a chance to hire a lot of different people and see a lot of changes and trends that go about. And so I think it's been fun putting this together and talking about this, and we'll talk about it in several different ways. Unlike the last speaker, Chuck, you can tweet my president at Iowa State because she can't fire me. And she might even respond to you. I don't know, but she was our Dean of Agriculture. Wendy Winterstein is a real good friend of mine. But I keep saying that the nice thing about being retired, they can't fire you anymore. So you can say what your thoughts. I want to just briefly talk about some of the issues that we are dealing with and that I'm seeing from looking at it from the outside now and observing what's been happening. I think as we look at it, not only in pork industry, but all of our agriculture industry, especially animal agriculture industries that I'm familiar with, the need for scientifically trained personnel is increasing. And I think also the thing we need to keep in mind that part of that academic subset and industry skill sets are very similar. So how we train some of that, and we're going to get into that a little bit, and one size does not fit all in what we need to be doing, but it takes an appreciation for various sizes and various types of training to make the whole system work. One of the other thing that's been very obvious to us is that there's fewer swine faculty in our universities today. And that, along with increasing number of students, is changing how we operate within universities, and it's putting some real challenges to us. We're seeing the output, academic output of PhDs are decreasing. That part is decreasing. And we've noticed a declining interest in domestic students pursuing a PhD. Part of that is because there's such a strong demand for graduates in industry. And if a person's coming out in industry says, I can go on to graduate school and get paid maybe roughly $25,000, $30,000 a year, but I can go to industry and make $60,000, $70,000, $80,000. Why do I want to put myself through going through grad school? We're seeing the same thing happen, people going on to vet school. Why should I go into this big debt load when I can go out in industry now and make money and not have to take that on? The other thing that I think has been a real driving force is what's happened to us is the decline in public research funds. And that is affecting how we recruit students and how we train students. And I think that then I hope we can circle this around and come back saying, do we need to change some things and look at things a little differently? And we tried to do some of those over the years to try to change some of these things that get cast upon us. But as we shrunk our public research funds, it really put more emphasis back on grant funds to support our research programs and support our graduate students, and it changed on how we recruited graduate students and what we were looking for. And the last thing, I'm not even going to touch very long on it, but the commitment to service has been declining among our faculty. Our students see that, And I think part of that is because of the tremendous pressure being put on to raise funds to run the programs, and that's having an impact on where we start seeing this overall picture in the future. Now, I'm just going to stop here and give you a little bit of background, because Kathy Witecki, when she was Dean of Agriculture at Iowa State, put out a paper on mission-oriented research, and I think as land-grant institutions, we sometimes need to stop and talk about what is important about land-grant institutions and what keeps us different than other public institutions or private institutions, and what is our mission in life. And on the research side of it, I think she made several comments that I think just bears going back and thinking about. First, we must make a conscious effort to focus our resources and expertise on identified community, state, national, and international problems. And the complex nature with the problems we're dealing with requires a range of research approaches from fundamental to applied, encompassing multiple disciplines. And usually one person doesn't have all that expertise to be able to do all that. There's a need to foster and work interdisciplinarily, and collegiality and open communications are essential for this success. And so I think that's one of the things we've got to continually strive on, say, how do we work together even within university systems? And then also the need to increase the understanding of our natural phenomena, and then being able to articulate how that can be transformed and put into practice. And what's the pathways that we need to go to make that thing so that it's usable and can have an impact. And the other thing she mentioned, that faculty and colleges are being held accountable to the public, being public institutions. And we need to be reminded of that periodically, that we are working as a public institution, paying salaries. We need to be reminded that we are accountable back on that. It's not what we want to do necessarily, but what we can do to have a positive impact on the industry and for the state and the federal government. Now, if I look at some past characteristics of our animal science programs, we used to have, and we have had, and still do today to some extent, we combine research, teaching, extension within departments, even though all those have changed. We've had mission-oriented programs. In other words, there needs to be, we know where we're heading when we go on these programs. We had base public funding for research and extension, and this helped, I think, promote interdisciplinary work. When I first went to Michigan State University, I was reminded that we had people, the older faculty, were working with people in other departments, and they said, well, why was that? Well, we said, at one time we were all in one building, and we had coffee together. And we got to know everybody, so had faculty in animal science, got to know people in agronomy, and et cetera, because they were all in one building. We started expanding and growing, and we got bigger buildings and the different buildings, and everybody got isolated, and sometimes our opportunities for interdisciplinary work then kind of fell by the wayside because we didn't have that personal interaction. The other thing that I thought was characteristic, too, that we had was our faculty understood production animal agriculture. They understood what was going on out there and how these decisions were being made, and if I did work in this area, could it have an impact? And most of the students we had an animal agriculture background. So they also had a strong interest in this area. And our research results were publicly available, and we had strong producer support, not only politically in state government and federal government, but we had it also within the university. They would walk into the administration and say, this is important to us. You need to find money to do this. We need this help in this area. And so those things kind of all tied together, the fact that we were working on problems that were important to them, or willing to work on problems important to them. We had the funds to do it. We got the funds to put in that place. So that's kind of where we came from. So we had some trends that then have really changed and affected that. I think we've had an aging and depopulation of our farm communities, and that has led to fewer students coming into our programs with a livestock background. So we now have an increase in students with no livestock production background coming in, which is, can be a challenge but an opportunity for us. We've had a lot of consolidations and mergers going on within industry especially. And when two companies merge, they usually don't just combine their research and development budget in together. It's usually they merge for a person being more efficient, and so they have one research budget that is about the size of what one of them was and the other not. I read an article about 15 years ago that said the only thing that has failed to merge in the American society has been our higher education. And so, and that really struck me, because I said, why are we struggling so much financially in trying to maintain resources, is the fact that we have not allowed ourselves to merge and do anything jointly in regionality. And I've spent time in my career trying to do things regionality, and that's not the easiest thing to do, because everybody wants their own. And so you always are fighting that to start with. There's been a shift in declining of research funding. Public funding has gone more to competitive grants. We don't have the base funding that we had as much in the past. And we've also then shifted a lot of our production areas of research funding into non-production areas, because we said society is demanding that we address some of these issues. Again, that affects some of how we can strive for efficiencies and increasing efficiencies in our production areas. Our faculty demographics have changed also dramatically. We've had a decline in faculty numbers, but an increase, as I mentioned, in undergraduate students, and that puts more of a burden on our faculty to be teaching, and which leaves less time then to do some of the research work that they really enjoy doing. Our shifting from a lot of times 12-month to 9-month appointments now also changes the characteristic. Now I'm going to make sure I have to go after research grants to pay that my summer salary, if you will, the 3 months, and that has an impact on what type of research grants they need to go after. Faculty start seeing granting agencies as their stakeholders, but not the producers. So we're working on how I can position this to get this grant, rather than how I can really have a positive impact maybe on animal agriculture. And that's really what led to the initiative in Michigan that we did back when I was there to get more state funding, is because our dairy industry had felt that our dairy faculty had started really looking more at granting agencies as their stakeholder and quit communicating basically back to producers what they were doing. And we're starting to see, as new faculty come on board, they really lack the understanding of our production systems. So how do you make that decision on where are your best opportunities to have a positive impact and improve things? Over a period of time, our holistic problem-solving approach is starting to lack. As our research becomes more reductionist, we see less systematic type research where we can look at this big picture, the whole picture, and put it all together. And that's some of the trends that I think we've just naturally occur, and every once in a while we need to maybe step back and look at it a little differently. Most of you know what's happened on research funding. You can see the red line there, the public agriculture R&D has kind of plateaued out in the early 2000s and has been on the decline. What's been going up has been a lot of our private R&D agriculture research, and but yet we're all lacking funding tremendously on the research side, and there's continued to be movements of trying to, how do we increase this funding both at the state and our state levels, but also at the federal level for increased funding in agriculture, and we need to be able to do that if we're going to stay competitive. And I think most of you have seen the numbers of how much more research funding is being done by China, India, and other countries, Brazil, than what we are here doing in this country. And that's a cause of concern, because we see the percent of grants that are being funded at the federal level is a pretty small and abysmal compared to what's really needed, and its long-term impact on what it does to our research infrastructure is, I think, very critical. Periodically, USDA does study on employment opportunities for agriculture, and the more recent one came out that to really show that we're going to be short on people. Short of people at the bachelor's degree, we're going to be short of people at master's and PhD. And so I just quickly want to go through these. I think just to make sure you understand, but almost 58,000 annual openings are forecast. We were probably going to have about 30,000 positions open, and that's going to make even more competitive to trying to find people to fill positions, which is going to then I think have also a change in the long term. The business and management side of it is about almost half of that, and I think that as we look at it long term, that's going to have some implications to us. Science and engineering is about a little over a quarter, and it's going to make a difference. If we look at it from the standpoint of our master's degrees, the makeup of our students hasn't changed dramatically over a 10-year period from the early 2000 to 2012 and 13, which this data came from. We do see that stayed pretty constant, maybe starting to get a little bit more ethnic minorities and into our master's programs. It's a slow process, but it's a process that's really needed if we're looking long term. Same way at the PhD level, we are seeing some shifts here. We're seeing more on the gender side, more females that are following through with PhDs than what we did in the turn of the century there. Ethnicity, we're starting to see some changes there in that. And then also citizenship, we're seeing a reduction in U.S. and more of an increase in foreign or international students in this pool. Again, that has some implications for us down the road, and in order to meet that talent pool, we need to be addressing some of those and looking at what we can do. Part of that survey also and study was what can university leaders and hiring managers say to prepare graduates for success. Universities probably really spend more time on internships in the field, while colleges say, or hiring managers say the college majors and the grade point averages and some of the technical skills maybe are employment while in college are probably a little bit more, put a little more emphasis on what the universities do, but by and large work on it similarly. So what do we need to do more to develop our graduates? If you look at the green line, the university leaders will say we're going to improve our communication skills, problem-solving skills, collaborative, work with diversity, and analytical skills. Probably more so than hiring managers. Hiring managers say look at organizational skills, technical skills, and team leading. And some of those things could be construed either way and interpreted different ways. But I think as we look at it, the ability to work together, ability to work in an organized fashion in teams or independently is going to be pretty important in the future. Now, I'm going to step back here and just give you a little bit of a background that something that made a big difference to me. When I was at Michigan State University, I had a faculty member in ag economics, Jim Bonin, wrote a paper in 1986 on the creation, development, utilization of knowledge. Now, Jim is no longer with us, but Jim spent part of his career advising and consulting with university presidents and land-grant institutions and deans of colleges of agriculture, talking about this whole emphasis of our land-grant mission and how we need to position ourselves to make sure it stays there. And he had broken down into, we had basic research, which is very disciplinary knowledge. We need to have that part. He also had the applied research, which is really more your maintenance subject matter, problem solving, which is your maintenance research, your adaptive research. How do we take basic or disciplinary knowledge and make it so it's usable and then put it into use? And he talked to our faculty there several times about this whole concept to understand that there are various needs across that whole continuum, and the arrows go both ways. We find places in use and say, we got a problem here, how do we solve it? Sometimes it has to take it all the way back to getting some very disciplinary research to solve that problem. But then back and forth, and it needs to be a communication back and forth. I adapted that just a little bit from his work there, more in terms of a livestock industry, looking at it from a basic research, the applied research, problem solving, and then into use. And understanding that none of us, and we don't have faculty that can do one extreme to the other and do it well. They don't have time, for one thing. Some of them could, but they don't have time. There's not enough hours in the day. And so we really end up saying we've got to train people differently. Sometimes we have people that need to be trained in very disciplinary knowledge, and we value that. But if we also then we need to have some who say, okay, I'm going to pick up ideas from the basic, and I'm going to try to say, how do I put this into use? And then we have others that need to be really working from a problem-solving standpoint of applied research. We've got a problem out here. What do we have to do to solve it? Let's get some answers, and then how do we put this into application or into use in the industry? And so we have people with different skill sets really are needed within our faculties, which means as we're training graduate students for the future, we need to be thinking about those different skill sets that might be how do that person, we best utilize that person's skill sets that they have. I was fortunate when I was in graduate school, even though my major professor was pushing me to the left as much as possible, he also recognized my interest in that was more pushing more to the right. So we ended up having a good compromise. And out of that, I even came to realize we need to have basic training and all our graduate students going through so they have an appreciation for what's going on the basic side. But then we also, the interest of being put that into use, into application is also, I think, extremely important for us. So one of the things we need to do as we look forward, and we've been, this last year, been traveling a lot with the U.S. Pork Center of Excellence, visiting various universities. And one of the questions comes up, most of these campuses we've been visiting is, find me a good swine person that can teach swine production, do applied research, do extension. And that's a skill set needed over on that applied research side. And we need to be developing those, and I think what we're seeing is that there is a real shortage of people being trained in this area now for the demand there. And part of the demand is that's where industry's at also. Our industry is really into that. Because the people we get over in the basic side, the people working on the basic side generally, not all the time, but generally are found in ARS or in your universities. This is where they've made their stake. But then we also need to be looking at how industry and universities then are competing for jobs in this more applied subject matter, adaptive type research into application in technical services. So it makes a difference and we're training people for those areas. It's going to be really important for us as we meet the human capital needs in the future, is having people trained in all these different areas that can work in different areas. Now, what are some of I'm going to go out here and say, from my perspective, what are some of the attributes or skill sets that are needed by our animal breeding and genetics graduates coming out? And one, first and foremost, they need to understand modern science. And I'm a firm believer you need to understand and be able to utilize both quantitative as well as molecular genetics within their portfolio. We've got to combine the two. It's not one or the other. And we've seen that in the past I think on our crop science areas. We certainly saw that when I was at Michigan State. They all went molecular. All the geneticists went molecular, and then all of a sudden they said, well, what do we do with this information? We had no quantitative geneticists there to help get this applied and put into place. So it really means that we've got to have people, either they're going to work together and share their thoughts together, but at least have an appreciation and understanding of both the molecular and the quantitative side. They really need to understand our swine production systems. We've got to figure out a way to do that. If they don't have that background, then we're going to talk about how we can do that. And then along with that, then that helps them understand how their research fits into the swine industry application. Flying home from a departmental review a number of years ago, I was in a conversation with one of the review team members, and basically came to the conclusion that we're going to hire faculty. If they're going to be the most valuable to us, they have to know, on the more basic side, where do they see this fitting into the industry? Does it have a place? And if it does, then they're probably going to be able to get it there. If we don't, we probably don't need it. That's probably not the right person. We need to be able to communicate with the industry. What I'm doing today could have an impact on your lives in the industry in the future. And my experience has been industry leaders love it and will accept that and support it if they can see what you're doing on the basic side, that they may not understand the science, but they understand that you are going to have the opportunity, what you're doing will have an opportunity to affect their lives in the future. We also got to think a little more broadly about and not get too siloed in what we do. We've got to understand the impact of our research on animal well-being, the environment, food safety, consumer acceptance, and it's good to have some of these discussions we have going on today. Because what we do, if we have a negative effect on some of these other things, it's not going to really fly. And I think we've seen that with some of the technologies that have come out have died because of lack of consumer acceptance, but yes, they were being pushed pretty heavily. Now, maybe we should have done a better job of communicating what those positive attributes were of those technologies. But if we don't understand that from the get-go and from the start, it could create some problems for us. Critical thinking and analysis of problems, multidisciplinary, are extremely important. Building teams, working in teams not only within animal science departments, but also across campus. Really important for us to understand if we're going to solve a problem or work in an area, how do we bring people of diverse thinking together and appreciate that diverse thinking and what it can do to strengthen where we go. The ability to work in a team approach as well as independently, I think, and we've got to figure out ways to do that because anymore industry, universities both need people working in teams, but then there are times you have to forge ahead independently on some things. And then leadership. I really get concerned that we do not recruit, foster enough leadership within some of our graduate students and programs. We need that leadership immensely. And if you looked at this last year, I think I counted we had 9 department chair positions open and have several failed searches because they could not find people who are willing to take on those responsibilities. That lack, not having the leadership in those positions, I think long-term can have some negative consequences for our industries. Now, last fall, a year ago, we had a National Swine Research Forum, and I think we had 3 major topics, and I'm going to just dwell on a couple of them here. Then we're still working through this forum, trying to come up with some action items that we can then say move ahead and get some answers. But one is, how do we fund research in the future? I think it's a critical issue. And it's one the industry itself has been talking about. We've relied on public funding a lot. Our commodity groups by themselves can't pick up everything we've lost on the public funding side. So we need new innovative ideas on how to fund research in the future. And then how do we meet the human and physical capital capacity needs of the pork industry in the future? Todd C. gave a great talk about that last year, and I'm just going to talk about a few things. In fact, he should have given this talk probably today. But I think there are several things that we talk about meeting the human capacity in the future. It doesn't start at the graduate level or at the faculty level. It starts back with getting kids that are young kids today that are involved in youth programs in the swine industry that have that interest in swine, and encouraging them to pursue this as a career, something they want to do. Our demographics have changed in our student body. They aren't going to come with that growing up on a farm and raising pigs, and that's fine. But we then have to compensate for that and say, how can we then bring them that experience so they understand that better? Give them that agriculture experience and knowledge, and then and some experiential learning opportunities are going to be really important. Don't underestimate how important excellence in teaching at the undergraduate is once we get them there. For that faculty member that's willing to work with those students and encourage them and challenge them and say, have you thought about going on to graduate school? let me give you some experiences or get you lined up with a faculty member that can give you experiences that you can now see this as a possible career path, because you've got the qualities that could make a good faculty member. I think that teacher at that level is extremely important. In recruitment, both at the undergraduate and graduate levels, is extremely important. We have to be a lot more proactive. I sit back and even in recruiting faculty, I said, what would you think about our football and our basketball teams if we just put out a position announcement, said we apply if you want interested in playing football at Iowa State University. And we'll sort through the applications and then see which ones we want to select. That's kind of the mentality we have taken within a lot of universities on hiring faculty or sometimes even graduate students or undergraduates. Have we really tried to be proactive in going after what we're looking for, who's going to best fit for what we're looking for? And I think those are the kind of challenges we're being faced with in the future to meet some of these capacity needs, is getting people that have the skill set, have the interest, and let them know that there are opportunities for them as they move forward. So I think that these are important issues that we're going to be we're dealing with, we're trying to deal with, and we'll continue to be dealing with. So I'm going to just ask some questions and let you think about this. What would be the impact if our graduate students were required to do an internship? We've had experience. We've had some experience with that within the past. Sent off graduate students in the middle of their undergraduate program or graduate program to do a 3-month, 6 months internship with a company. Paid a lot of positive benefits. It helped that person grow immensely as to what the expectations were on the other side of when they finished that graduate degree. I think we need to think about, given the makeup of our students, is this something that we need to really be thinking more about as requiring? I've often wondered how on the funding side, if faculty were funded rather than specific research projects, should we just fund a faculty member that we know that will develop, recruit, and train and educate the right type of graduate student that can meet the needs of industry and academia? Maybe we ought to be looking at how do we fund them. The Canadian egg industry did this a number of years ago. Rather than them sitting down and say, well, you send us research proposals and we'll decide what we want to fund, they said, faculty member, you're going to get $107,000 a year for 5 years, work on these problems, get the right students, train them. Would we be doing things differently, and would that give us a chance to do some things differently? I think the industry, if they funded graduate students rather than projects, we were successful a number of years ago with the Iowa Pork Producers Association, agreed to put in $100,000 a year, and have done, I think, reading agreements now for 5 years or whatever, but to use for money to attract and recruit graduate students in that have an interest in the swine industry. Allows you don't wait for a grant to get the grant and then find a grad student get started right away, because you've got to get that turned around quickly. It allows you to say, okay, I know next year that I'm going to have a graduate student available. Maybe I ought to start looking and recruiting that in a very proactive way. Then I think we will help us direct us toward where we can get and guarantee that we're going to have the right people there. How about if we put more business and management? What would be the impact if we put more business and management incorporated in the curriculum? Especially for those that have an interest in going into industry, but I think it'd be helpful to our people who end up on faculties also. What about if what would be the impact if all graduate students were required to have a meaningful teaching or extension experience? Would that change the outlook and the flavor of what we turn out as a product? And what would be the impact if graduate students were required to participate in a multidisciplinary research project in addition to their own thesis research? And maybe doing that, working with another faculty member that was leading that research to broaden out some of their experiences and see how to work in teams. Are these things that we should be thinking about as we change and try to meet the challenges of workforce in the future? I'm going to end up with a couple of comments here, and then I think we'll be. But John Robinson, who is a reproductive biologist at Aberdeen, Scotland, gave the George Scott Robinson Memorial Lecture in 1994, and I was there about that shortly after that. But he had a comment that I really liked. He said, "Perhaps this succinct way of portraying my views on the role of animal science and animal production in the next century is to express a wish. Wish would be simply to retain my present knowledge of applied animal production, retrain as a molecular biologist, and establish a research career aimed at harnessing the potential new biology to improve the health, welfare, and efficiency of farm animal production systems within funding arrangements that reflect a clear vision of the real needs of animal production. Having the background and understanding the industry, but yet putting the science to work to make it better." And I think that kind of encompasses what I think we need to be continuing to strive to do, bringing those two forces together. And then the UK in 2009, the employability challenge from the UK, United Kingdom's Commission on Employment and Skills. These employable skills or soft skills are the lubricant of our increasingly complex interconnected workplace. They're not a substitute for specific knowledge and technical skills, but they make the difference between being good at a subject and being good at doing a job. And so the long term, being good at doing a job means we're going to hopefully can have a major impact. And we may have the best knowledge, but if we can make that have an impact, then I think we're going to be more successful and it's going to be more supportive.